Okay. Um, Welcome to the Novel Idea Society. I think we're season eight. The season eight, 8 years. We've read over 80 books. So we've been here a time or two. For people who are new, I'm Sam Maciag. I am the host of the book club and the host of the CBC Saskatchewan News at 6 and 11. And this has been my baby for a really long time. And it's exciting that something good came out of the pandemic, because this was the ability for us to connect with fabulous authors. And our fabulous author this month wrote The Berry Pickers, and it's Amanda Peters, and she's with us tonight. Thank you for being here.
I'm very excited to be here.
First of all, massive congratulations. I hear we got a little accolade today.
Yeah, I
You want to
got
tell
two
people about it?
actually. Yeah. So in Canada, I was shortlisted for the Writers' Trust Atwood Gibson Award, Fiction Award, which came completely by surprise to me. And then in the US, I was shortlisted for the Barnes and Noble Discovery Award. So it's been a really good day for Amanda Peters and the Bear Pickers.
The royal we, of course.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of people that
Um,
help with this book, so I think it is the royal we.
what does it feel like, though, like you're Canadian, to be acknowledged by an organization that was created by Margaret Atwood and her husband? Like, you don't get bigger in the Can Lit world than Margaret Atwood.
No, you do not. So it's kind of like when I was reading about it today after I got shortlisted, like, okay, I'm going to read about this. And neither her nor her husband have ever won this award. So
I
I
mean,
was
can they though, if it's their company?
I don't know, but I was just like, this is kind of crazy, and I was not expecting it at all. So, and I was also very excited that someone I know and whose writing I adore, Michelle Porter, is on there as well. So I was like, yay! There's two Indigenous writers on this 5 panel, and all the other books are brilliant. So it's just I don't know. I'm just still in shock.
Okay. I want to talk to you a little bit about your background, but first I have to say I read this book when it came out, and it is probably my favorite book of the year. And it felt like a very early time in the year to declare that. But you wrote in such a way that I became very invested in these people, that I really like wondered about them when the book was done. And I don't often get that attached to characters, but I'm curious if you can walk us back through your background to tell us a little bit more about you as an Indigenous author. What's your background in history?
Yeah, no problem. So my dad is Mi'kmaq. I'm from Glooscap First Nation. I'm also from Glooscap First Nation, but my mom is of settler descent here in Nova Scotia. They were high school sweethearts. Didn't last very long. That's okay. I'm the
Left
best
that
part of
out.
that.
We wouldn't have known.
But I also have a ridiculously amazing stepmom, so I cannot go through my life without acknowledging her as well. But I always wanted to write my whole life, and I didn't know kind of what I wanted to write. So when my dad said, after I started writing really seriously, he was like, "You should write about the berry pickers." I was like, "Dad, I don't write nonfiction. I write fiction. I make things up. Like it's imagination." And he was very adamant that I should write about the berry pickers. So I said, "What do you mean by the berry pickers?" So my dad and his family always traveled down to Maine every summer in the 60s and 70s to pick blueberries. And that's how they paid for like school supplies and stuff like that for the kids. And I was like, "No, Dad, that's nonfiction." I kept saying this. Then one weekend he's like, "Let's go down." So me and my dad packed up the Prius and we went down to Maine, and he told me all of his stories. It was like a road trip, a 3-day road trip. He told me all of his stories. He showed me the fields. He explained everything. And while I was there, the first line of chapter one of Joe's first chapter just came to me. And I think that was it. The rest of the story just unraveled from there. And I keep saying, like, it's the book that I didn't want to write. And my dad was right in the end.
When you say Joe's first chapter came to you, was he based on someone that your dad told you about, or was it someone that you envisioned based on kind of the amalgamation of all those stories?
Yeah, it's the amalgamation of all the stories. It's completely fiction. His name is Joe. That is intentional. My grandfather was Chief Joseph Peters, and I loved him very, very much. So I named him Joe. But he has no actual relation to my grandfather. He's completely fictional. but I kind of put people's names in there to honor them a little bit. So yeah, Joe was my grandpa. Lewis was my great grandfather. So yeah, I just threw those in there.
So tell me then where you came up. Like this story reads like nonfiction. And I think that that's kind of a sad piece of Canadian history to acknowledge that this could have been a true story. I mean,
Mhm.
this very well could be a true story for all we know. It's very believable in detail. Um, when you come to the Ruthie story, where did the inspiration for her come from?
I actually I had a friend tell me that stories come from the ancestors because I don't know where they come from. I say there's this mythical cloud above all writers' heads where stories just come down through your arm and into the computer. And Ruthie's story, I didn't actually intend to write it. So when I was writing the book, it was all from Joe's perspective. And then it was getting a little bit dull, to be honest. And I had this like voice in my head saying, I want to tell my own story. I don't want someone else to tell it. Like I felt like she was talking to me. I have them fully formed characters in my head. I was like, okay, okay. So then I started to write a little bit of hers, and then she just came full fledged, like boom, there she was. So I had to write her story.
So when you write stories, people stories, are you a plotter or do you fly by the seat of your pants? Like, do you know where the story is going when you start, or are you just letting the characters take you where they go?
This one, I had a very detailed outline, which after about chapter three, I threw away. So I kept it because I did follow some of the minor streams, but like I said, it was all supposed to be Joe, and then I incorporated Ruthie into it. So um, I do a detailed outline, but I do not hold myself to that because sometimes the creative brain just goes where the creative brain wants to go. And I think you just gotta follow that. So while I did have the outline, I veered very, very far from what my outline was. So I think I'm a little bit of both.
Are you working on another book?
Yep.
What are you doing with that book? I feel like that answers the question. What are you doing with this one?
So I don't like to talk about this one, and here's my reason is that I started two more stories, and when I talked about them to people, they seemed to go away. So I'm keeping this one really close to my heart because it worked and I without talking about it. But funny enough, this one I wrote the last paragraph first.
Oh,
And then I went back and said, okay, now I know how it's going to start. Now I know how it's going to end. And now I'm going to fill in the middle. So I'm working on that now. But I do have a short fiction collection coming out in June. So that's I'm working on editing that with my editor right now. So, but this other one is sitting right there. You guys can't see it, but it's sitting there staring at me because I have to print it off to edit it with by hand. And I think it's gonna have to wait a little bit until I can have the time to get to it.
there are people in this book club who read the last page first, so I feel like you just delighted them immensely with that.
No, you can't read the last page first. Oh, no.
Tell me about the feedback you've had for this book because it was your first. What's it been like going from hoping to be an author, going through the writing process, getting picked up by a major publisher, and then going through, you know, I was going to say advocating for the book, but that's not the right word, but the publicity that comes with the gig.
Yeah, I'm kind of still in a pinch me mode right now. So it came out on April 4th here in Canada, and I knew it was coming out in the US in the fall, and I was like, that's exciting. So, but now it's been picked up by the UK, and they're publishing it in all their territories, with the exception of Canada. And it's just Goodreads likes it mostly. Some people don't, but that's okay. Yeah, it's I don't know. I really like when I get personal emails from people who say that they liked it. And that's kind of like even though it may get all this publicity in the end, I'm really excited by the people who write to me and say this meant something to me. So I think that's where I'm kind of like focusing my attention and my joy right now is on the folks who got something from the book. And of course you can get that on Goodreads as well, but Goodreads can be scary. So
I was going to say, do you read your reviews?
I do. I read them all.
And what do you
And
take from the bad ones?
I take that's fine. Reading is so subjective. Like you love what you love when you read, and there are things that you don't love. There are very, very, very famous books that people love that I can't understand why, and I say that's perfectly okay. It's just not my thing. So if
Mhm.
they don't like my book, I'm like, that's okay. You didn't have to. As long as you're reading, I think it's a perfectly good thing. Although there was one review where they didn't like my book because of the edges of the book where the I'm
The way
gonna
the
say,
book is cut.
yeah, the way the book is cut. And so they gave me a 1 star.
For texture? I didn't know that that
Yeah.
was part of a book review.
I thought it was hilarious. I posted it to my social media. I'm like, this is great. Like, so I don't know. If that's what the worst thing they have to say about the book, I'm pretty happy about it.
Okay, let's go back to the book.
Mhm.
Let's talk about Norma's parents and
Yeah.
that whole story arc because there are a lot of secrets
Yeah.
in that family. Um, do you think that this story could have played out any other way than it did?
No, no. I be it was just in my head that way. This is the way it had to be. And I know that some people really detest Norma's family. Um, but it's about trauma and heartache, and this is how it had to go.
What role do you think these stories in fiction play in the greater conversations we're having about reconciliation, particularly this week with the attention on Saturday?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I think writers sometimes don't intend to make political statements, but it's also just part of who we are as an Indigenous woman, right? So the fact that a brown girl could be stolen and no one cares, that happens a lot in Canada. I hate to say it, but it does. And don't get me wrong, I'm very glad every day that I live in this country, but it does happen. So I wanted to say some of these things, but not beat it over the head, you know? Just people need to acknowledge that some of these things can happen. Like people don't care about Indigenous bodies so much, especially in the 1960s and 70s when this was set. So I kind of wanted to say a little bit of that, but I didn't want to um, turn people away from the subject matter. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, so I wanted to address it, and I think I did it in a very subtle way, but still in a very powerful way that people can understand that this is something that does destroy loving, caring families.
What kind of feedback have you got from people on that particular part of the story?
People just say generally that they like the way I address that because it wasn't harsh, but I think sometimes it needs to be harsh, so I don't know if I succeeded or not.
Did your editor have any changes for you in those moments when you're talking about things that are personal to your culture?
No, my editor is remarkable. All she did was she took the book and she just sent me a list of questions for me to think about. And when I read them, and I was like, first, of course, you're like, I don't think you're getting me. Then I sat back a little bit and then I read them like, oh yeah, you are getting me. You're just making me a better writer. So no, she didn't, my agent didn't battle me on that. And my agent was so generous. She waited 2 years for this book. She signed me and then waited 2 years until I was ready to present it to her. And then my editor was the same way. They're like, this is your story. And yeah, she just asked me questions and made me think about what I was writing and how I was writing and how I wanted to present it. But no, the major changes on that, they were perfectly fine.
When you pitched the book, did you pitch it based on Joe's story or did you pitch it based on what it evolved to be?
Actually, I gave the first 7 chapters to my agent, and that's what she sold it on. And then I had so that took me 3 years to write the first 7 chapters, and then I had 3 months to write the last 8 chapters after it sold.
So it had evolved. If you the first 7 chapters, you already had Ruthie, Norma, and all of that in there then.
I did. I was very fortunate. I was doing my Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing at the Institute for American Indian Arts in New Mexico. And I had a fantastic cohort of fiction writers and mentors who I would pass in chapters as my assignments. and they would workshop them and we would talk about them. And they were just so instrumental in making those first 7 chapters um, good the way I wanted them to be. So I'm eternally grateful to them.
That's what you mean by the group effort.
Yeah, it was a group effort. I swear there's so many people involved. If you look at my knowledge birds, there's a lot of people, and all those people had a part in making the book that I wanted it to be, something that I could be proud of.
I'm always curious how a first time author, and I mean, when I say first time author, no one who gets published for the first time, that's not the first thing you've ever written. But
No,
as a first time published author, how did you get the attention? How did you manage to snag such a big publisher and not have to necessarily go the independent route?
my agent, honest to God, like some people don't go through agents. I am not a businessy kind of person. I just want to create and I want to write. And she just took the book and she had complete faith in it. And she just went out into the world and said, "This is something you guys should read." And HarperCollins agreed.
So from there, you give her that. How long did it take from, you guys should read this to her saying you have a book deal and then now it's, oh my gosh, I have to finish this. How much time did you actually have?
I think that's about 2 weeks. I can't
That's
remember.
that's quick.
It was back in September 2021, so you'll forgive me. I'm 46 years old, so I got the memory problem.
Okay.
But I think she put it out and HarperCollins snapped it up in 2 weeks, and then they said we want the full manuscript by the end of December. And I said, okay. And like I said, I had it all mapped out, but I didn't actually follow it. And I kind of knew where it was going to go. So I just sat down every day, basically every Saturday and Sunday, because I was working full time at the time. And I would sit down at like 7 a.m. and write till 7 p.m. kind of thing, and just getting it out there. But I think it came very naturally after I had the first 7 chapters ready because I knew where I wanted to go. The character was so entrenched in my mind. I was very committed to them, committed to the story. So I think it made it a little bit easier to write it after that.
So what did you do before you were a full-time writer? I use quotation marks.
Okay, this is going to be a long title, but I was a capacity development manager in Atlantic, Canada for the First Nations Financial Management Board.
Did
Yeah.
that fit on a business card?
Oh, yeah, but it's abbreviated. Yeah,
So you
so
worked in financial management?
I work with First Nations communities in Atlantic, Canada to establish good governance systems and good financial management systems.
So did you actually have to deal with numbers and finance, like working that? I ask that because I find that people typically live in one side of their brain or the other, and they're usually either the very science mathy minded or they're the more creative and artistic minded. Are you living in both sides of your brain?
I didn't do the accounting part, I did the policy development part,
Okay.
which I
Okay.
love. I still love. It's still like I before prior to that job, I worked in my own community as a CEO and a director of administration, and I worked in Indigenous health policy representing Atlantic Canadian communities. So I love policy and writing policy and analyzing policy. So that's one side of my brain. And then I love literature, which is the other side of the brain, which is now kind of the thing that I always loved and now I get to do.
Do you come by your political statements honestly then?
My political statements?
Well, you were saying earlier, you were saying that, you make political statements in your book without really meaning to.
Oh,
Your
no.
background is a little like your background almost leads you to it because you see the way things have gone.
Yeah, so I know how it is in Indigenous communities. I know what it's like. I've worked in Indigenous communities my entire professional career, which has been since 2009. Prior to that, I was kind of in school and traveling around the world a little bit. So since then, 2009 until just recently when I started at Acadia University, that's been my whole life. So I have been to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission discussions, and I have worked in health policy where I've seen people be mistreated. So I'm very familiar with our
Mm.
stories. I would never put a story into form that is personal to somebody ever because it's their story. But there's a whole bunch of different things that come together. And I think it's kind of sad, to be honest, that all these stories are so familiar now that they
Mm-hmm.
can just be anonymized. And that it doesn't that tell us something about our history. So, yeah.
I think that's what I meant by come by it honestly, though, is you have this incredible like wealth of knowledge from your background that you're able to form these stories that are fiction, but also very believable that could be nonfiction, which is that sad state of history and sad state of affairs too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I actually had there's a I don't want to how do I do this without creating a spoiler in the book?
No,
There's a part.
everybody's read it. That's the
Oh, everybody's
everybody
read
there's
it.
read it. Yeah,
Okay,
it gets
perfect.
announced at the beginning of the month, and everybody's read it. And if they haven't read it, too bad.
Oh, okay. So when Charlie dies, because Charlie does die, everybody's like, why wouldn't they just take him to the hospital? I've had non-Indigenous crowds ask me that question. Why don't they just take him to the hospital? I was like, because they knew that no one would help them, right? And Indigenous people don't ask that because they knew that back in the 60s and early 70s, no one helped them. And also, no one helped them when their daughter disappeared in the same area, right? So it's just kind of interesting about the questions and the experiences of the readers and how they impact the interpretation of the text. Yeah.
His injuries were really graphic, I just have to say.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, not sorry.
Sorry, not sorry. I did actually. That's everybody's like, did you ever have an emotional hard time? And I was like, I actually really had a hard time with his demise. So,
Were you personally attached to, I mean, they're your babies, they're your characters, but is there
all of
anyone
them.
that you're really personally attached to that if someone attacks that character, you take it quite personally?
Yeah. If anybody talks about May, I will get annoyed. She's just, I don't know. I think she's the embodiment of maybe all my aunts or and my moms. Like my mom and my stepmom. She's just a strong, powerful woman who speaks it the way it is, and
Mhm.
I just love her. So if someone were to attack May, I may take issue.
How important was the land as a character for you?
I had this question this weekend at the Cabot Trail Writers Festival, and the only thing I could think of was that it doesn't even come into our mind that we deliberately write about land. I think it's in our DNA. It's part of being an Indigenous writer that it just is part of what we are and how we write and how we interpret the world. So I never intentionally, although I've heard a lot of people say the scenery was so vivid and I could picture myself that you
Very
described that
visual.
very
Yeah.
well. Yeah, and I was like, I don't think that was something I did intentionally. It's just something I do automatically as a writer because it's part of who I am. You know what I mean? So my friend said she's like, it's blood memory. I was like, yes, it's blood memory. So it's blood memory as Indigenous people. We know that the land is always going to be a character. It cannot not be a character.
Speaking of blood memory, I want to go back to your dad because your dad's the one that took you on the trip, told you the
Mhm.
stories. Has your dad read the book?
He has. It's his first book, actually. He's read front to back, and he loved it. So that made me very happy because I ultimately when I was writing the book, I wasn't thinking that it would ever get published or anything like that. It was just something I wanted to do. Like I wanted to finish writing a book, and it was like, well, why? I was like, I want my mom and my dad to be proud of it. So the
Oh.
fact that they're proud of it, and my mom is a ferocious reader. She reads like 4 or 5 books a week. So I kind of hoped she would like it, and she did. And my
Did they
stepmom,
give you notes?
they did not give me notes. No, no, they did not give me notes. But my mom, my dad, and my stepmom, my sisters, and my brother, they've all read it and they all love it. So that makes me happy.
I know that there's a pretty strong contingent and relationship among Indigenous writers right now because there has been so much success and
Yeah.
um, so much. I don't even want to say that there's a focus on it. There's just been so many great books that have been released by Indigenous authors, particularly in the last year. We talked to Jessica Johns.
Oh, nice.
Um, oh my gosh, when was that? Sometime last year. And
Yeah.
she talked about the relationships that she has built with other Indigenous authors and how that it's not even a case of like building each other up, but it's led to some really great friendships and some great mentorships. Are you finding that as well?
Oh, goodness. Yes. So in 2021, I was chosen by Katarina Vermette for the Rising Stars program for the Writers Trust, and her and I have become good friends.
Amazing.
Yeah, so a couple weeks ago she did her launch in Toronto and I got to interview her for it and it was just so lovely because she was such a good mentor to me that it was kind of crazy. And then I met Michelle Good this summer. Her and I did an interview together and we've become really good friends and it's just amazing. like amazing. Like these are people I've idolized, and now I text them and say, "Hey, how you doing?" So it's just kind of like a bizarre world. But even here in Nova Scotia, before all that, I had Shaolin Chowdhury, who's like a brilliant poet, Mi'kmaq poet, and she's always been influential. And Andrea Curry, who's Métis, who lives here in Nova Scotia, and they've always been so supportive. Like it's just, yeah, there's so many great friendships that I've developed that I'm very, 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 very grateful. And now Michelle Porter and I are both nominated for the Atwood Gibson Award. So I'm like, yay, I have a friend on the list. It's so exciting.
And I mean, if you win, you get a significant chunk of money.
Yeah, yeah. So they told me this morning.
um, so I have to ask you this, and I'm giving a spoiler away to the room, but I just got confirmation that Katharina Vermette is going to do the book club in January. We read The Break in like 2016, 2017, but we didn't have the same capabilities that we have now. So when The Circle came out, I was talking back and forth with her publication team about maybe finally getting this author whose books that I've read so many times over the years. And I mean, she's in Winnipeg, like we could
Yeah.
drive there. So I'm excited. So any tips or tricks for chatting with her that you want to unveil to everyone and not just me?
She's very easy to talk to. So just, and she doesn't, she just loves she's just very easy to get along with. Like when she chose me as a mentor, I'd read The Break and The Strangers was just coming out. And I was like, oh my God, because of course I love The Break and I read it back then. And then I met her via Zoom and telephone, and she was just like every other person. She's just so down to earth and so real and just a brilliant storyteller. And I just say, just enjoy it. Just chat with her.
So who do you read? Who are your favorite authors that go to when the book comes out? You're like, got it today.
Oh, recently, Katerina Vermette, The Circle, although I got to read that as an arc. Another benefit of
Because you're
being
in
a
her
writer.
circle now.
I
See what I did
am.
there? The circle.
Yeah, I saw that. That was
Circle.
really, really done.
Mhm.
But let me see. Oh, Lauren Groff's new book just came out, Faster Wild. So I'm very excited about that. Um, oh goodness, so many. The Never Whistle at Night. I don't know if you've heard of
Oh, I've
that.
seen lots of people talking about that one.
Yeah, I got it, and I'm very excited to start reading it because I know quite a few of the writers, which I didn't think I knew, but I was very excited. So I got that on my bedstand, right now. Oh, goodness, you oh, my favorite writer who I always go to when I'm feeling like bleh, is Jane Urquhart. I love Jane Urquhart. I don't know if you know, but her book, The Underpainter, is where I go. That or Anna Green Gables.
Mhm.
I'm a Nova Scotian, so go to Anna Green Gables for when I'm feeling sad and I want something beautiful to read. There's just so many. I always find this such a difficult question because in the last couple of months I've read like Fatima Ashgar's When We Were Sisters
Mhm.
and If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English, and I don't know, and Fame by Emery McDonald. There's all these really brilliant books I've read recently, and I just never know how to say, what are you reading? What do you love right now? I'm like, all of it. It's all brilliant. Just go out and read, people. Go out and read.
Um, oh God, and my brain just went in and out. Um, do you find it hard to read though when you're writing? That's what I was getting to. Do you find it hard to, does it influence or is it difficult for you?
Nope. I love to read. I take reading as like inspiration. What can I learn from these people? But also sometimes I just want a really good story. I just want to like not think about it and just dive in and live another life. Like, right? That's what literature does to us, right? It gives us another perspective. So I just love to dive into a book and just live that life. And no, I always read. I'm always reading.
Okay. I'm going to open up the floor for questions. We have people in the room and we have people online. I can start with online if any of the people in attendance. Julie usually has a question, not to put her on the spot. But if any of you have questions online, here's your opportunity to speak. Oh, Angie raised her hand. Go ahead, Angie.
I don't know if it's so much a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. um, as an observation, I listened to listened to it on Audible just because I need something while I'm driving, and it made me cry. I had to pull over, so I just it really it was really powerful, and now I'm just sharing it with everybody I know. You have to read this book. So I just wanted to share that thank you. And
Oh,
whoever you got to do the voice actors, I was very invested in the people that did the roles as well. It was
yeah.
really
They're,
powerful.
they're very good, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
I
good.
was
I'm so
really
grateful.
impressed.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you had an emotional connection to the book.
Yeah, I did, and I liked May as well. Um, but yes, but there was just things about Ruthie when Ruthie became Ruthie again that it was just like I didn't have her life, but I could feel those things. And kudos to you because you could draw that out. So
Oh,
thank you.
thank you. I'm blushing right now.
Thanks, Angie. Hang on. I'm going to switch this. Oh, and Julie has a question.
No, just a comment, just to say thank you, Amanda, for the book. It was very powerful, and I can see, Sam, why it was like your top read, and you picked it and favored in that way. I listened to it as an audiobook, and yes, the two characters, well, the two actors that did the voice work, just fantastic. And I also read the book, and normally I read the book first, but I couldn't get a hold of a copy, so I listened to the audiobook first and then I read the book. And so I feel like I got the best of all worlds. Were you happy with the audiobook recording of it?
I was happy. I was completely
Yes.
happy with the actors, but when I listen to it, I feel like I can feel my mistakes.
Oh, no.
Yeah,
Really?
yeah. I think this is a writer thing. Like we just
Mhm.
we focus on what we would want to change. So I had a mentor tell me once that revision is finished when you're dead. So I just hear things. I was like, oh, if I could have that back now, I would change it. So while I love the audiobook, I love them. I can't listen to it because I listen to it, I was like, oh, I would take that sentence out or I would have said that differently. So I don't know why it's different when you look at it in print, but
Yeah,
when I hear it, I'm just like, oh, I want to change it. But I love those actors. They did such an amazing job. Yeah.
they did. I think you should be so happy with it because it was so powerful, both as an audiobook and as a book.
Oh, thank
And
you.
yeah, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Amanda, what would you change? Because as you're saying all of this, I'm like, what would you, is there something right off the top of your head that you would have done differently?
It's nothing big. There's nothing big I would have changed. It's just like some sentences I was like, oh, those words rhyme and they shouldn't rhyme and it irritates me. Or that sentence, I feel like I've repeated myself too many times, so I would take some of that out. It's just small things. It's nothing big. The story itself is exactly how I wanted it. It's just those little niggly bits that I wish that well, I don't know. People seem to like it and think it's okay. So maybe it did turn out the way it was. But I think as a writer, you're always thinking, how could I make this better?
It's
Right?
funny though when you say that because I encounter that not to compare what you do to what I do because what you do takes way more skill. Um, but writing news stories and then reading them out loud when things rhyme, it's terrible. Like
Hmm.
especially when it's something super serious. I once I really shouldn't say this out loud, but I did when I was very early in my radio career when I was never little, but when I was younger, I said a shot in the head leaves one woman dead, and I didn't know what the tone. Like I picked it up and hadn't read my scripts in advance and said it in the most enthusiastic Dr. Seuss way possible, and could not take it back because once the
Yeah.
words come out of your mouth, so while when you're reading things on paper, they don't rhyme the same way as when they come out of your mouth. So I
They
actually can identify with that.
thank you because they don't. Because now when I'm reading and I read that there's a couple sentences where I've rhymed and I didn't intentionally want to rhyme. I like it wasn't intentional. I'm like, oh, oh, I wish I could change
Because it's
that.
the way people talk, right? Like the dialogue makes sense in your head, but
Yep.
when you read things out loud, it's different. Do you write everything on a computer or are you handwriting or what's your writing to editing process?
it's a mixture. I often wake up at like 3 in the morning and write things on my phone just because it's there beside my bed as my alarm clock. So I'll have like
Why
I'll
are
wake
you
up in the
getting up at
morning.
3 o'clock in the morning?
I always wake up between 3 and 4. It's just a thing. I always go back to sleep, but I wake
Oh,
up and then I'll write something because just something's in my head. Or when I first go to bed, as soon as I'm like falling asleep, I'll have a really good idea. So I'll write it down. Sometimes I carry a notebook with me at all times and I'll just write things down really quickly. But the vast majority of it I do on my computer. When I'm done something like a draft, I print it off and then I take a red pen, it has to be red, and then I just destroy it. Just like the oh my goodness, what was I thinking? This has to go, this has to go, this doesn't make sense, let's fix that. So I'm a red penner on paper.
okay. Do we have questions in the room? I will turn the webcam around.
Compliment.
Okay, more compliments coming your way. Get ready for more red cheeks.
Oh.
Uh, uh, there's people. Okay.
Hi. Hello, people.
Okay. This isn't everyone, but it's as close as it's.
Can you hear me, Amanda, or should I stand up to the mic?
Can you hear him?
I can hear him. I heard my name.
Come closer.
Again, just an absolutely fantastic book. I finished it Sunday evening, and just like I think Angie was saying, I was in tears at the end. I was just, it was almost a perfect ending. You know, sad but happy, and I'm getting choked up talking about it. But
Oh.
yeah, so and similar, I went out for supper with a friend on Monday night for her birthday, and I was just raving about the book and telling her you have to read this. And just it's such a powerful story. I was chatting to my neighbor here, just I'm sort of squirreling off to the side, talking about missing and endangered Indigenous women. Regina has a very famous story of Tamara Keepness, who disappeared 30 years ago.
She'd be 20. Well, her sister just turned 25, I think.
20 years
so
ago.
20 years ago, 20-ish years ago, yeah.
And they, 20 years later, we still don't know what happened to this young girl, right? So it's just sort of a personal thing for us here in Regina, right? That these unfortunately do happen, right? So
yeah, unfortunately, that's such a common story, right? It's a common story across the country, across Turtle Island in general, and it's upsetting. But I'm glad you had a good experience with the book.
Well, it was fantastic. Again, one of my favorite reads this year. So thank you again. But and congratulations on the awards. A lot of books I love, and I love the story, but yours was also so well written, and it's nice when they come together, right? And that's, obviously that shows up in you getting nominated for 2 very prestigious awards, right? So
thank you. Do you know what's funny is that I tried so hard to be like a professional literary writer, and it was turning out so terrible. And I was like, I'm just gonna write the way I want to write, and then that this is the result. So thank you for saying that. It gives me faith in my own abilities to write a good story.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, well written and good stories. They're sort of separate things, but in this case, I thought it was both, right? So thank you again.
Thank you.
Oh, Jen, you're gonna have to come closer or yell.
Oh, I have a pretty loud voice. Can you hear me? No?
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask the in particular reason why Joe stopped in Little Saskatchewan in the Badlands, and if you have any ties to our land, being from out east. Is there a particular why you chose where?
Nope, never been. I've been to Regina once. That was it. But no, I've never been. But I had him out east here. When something goes wrong or when you need a job, what you do is you drive west because there's nowhere to go east. You're gonna hit the ocean really, really quickly here. So like in Nova Scotia, you're never more than 60 kilometers away from the ocean. So here it is just what we do. We drive west, and I was like, okay, he has to drive west because there's no other option. And then I was like, okay, where does he drive west? And so I just pulled out a map of Canada and I'm looking at it. And I have friends obviously out in the prairies and stuff everywhere. And I'm just looking like, where would he go? What does he want to do? And the Badlands are so kind of iconic, and the grass. And so I just wanted him to stop there. So I just picked Swift Current on a map, like, okay, that's where he's going to go. So it wasn't, I don't have any connection. But not, I wouldn't say the legend of the area, but the reputation of the area, I just wanted him to be there.
Love it.
Yeah. Natasha, go ahead.
If I'm allowed.
Speak up.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi.
I'm Natasha. And yeah, I absolutely love the book. I was hoping you could talk about the importance of Ruthie's aunt, and her aunt's partner, and the strength of those women in her life.
Well, yeah. So I pride myself on being super auntie. I have nieces and nephews and no children, so I am super auntie. And I have really remarkable aunts myself. So I wanted a really strong person. I didn't want to be a best friend to be there for Ruthie, because I just wanted to be somebody older who she could go to. Like I had hoped that my nieces and nephews would come to me, and they do. So I wrote Aunt June. Now Alice as her partner, I never set out and intended that. It just happened. It just is who they are as people. And I think this is where that mythical storytelling comes from, right? Is that I didn't intend to write them that way. They just are that way. And they just were that way. And I love them. They're such a lovely couple. And yeah, and I was kind of heartbroken. Everybody's like, why did you kill someone? I'm like, I didn't kill people. It's a story. Stop saying that. But we as humans, we have to learn how to deal with loss, right? Because it's so, especially I'm 46 years old, so I'm getting used to losing people gradually. And I think it has to be done, but we have to also remember that we loved them and that they were very hugely important people in our lives. And Aunt June and Alice were so influential in her mental health and her getting through her childhood and her finding out who she was. They were so instrumental in that. So I do love those two characters as well.
Next question. No. That's your question.
Well, I'm curious. So I spent a number of years in Nova Scotia, which is partly why I was really keen to pick up the book. And I also have connections to Maine. So I was very excited about the imagery. And I was curious, given that you're from Nova Scotia yourself, I mean, I understand plot line wise why a lot of the description was in Maine, but I was kind of expecting a lot more of the imagery to also be in Nova Scotia or kind of be shared, and why you decided to focus, or maybe I just didn't pick up on it, but to me it seems like a lot more of the strong imagery was based in Maine, despite the story kind of crossing the border, and I was curious about that.
Yep. I think it's because the main event happens in Maine, and then Joe goes back to Maine because he can't go home. So the Nova Scotia part is kind of limited to Joe's early life, and then when Norma goes back, right? So, yeah, I think because the main event happened in Maine and Joe can't go home, I think that's why the majority of it happens in Maine. He does start to come home, and then he just can't bring himself to do it, and he goes back down, right? So I think Maine is like an escape, I guess. And I did. There is the chapter where Norma go home. She doesn't know it's home. Goes to Nova Scotia on vacation. And that was really fun to write, because when the book came out, I was in Toronto actually at an event, and one of my elementary school, high school friends was there because she lives in Toronto now. I was like, did I do good? Did I explain really good? She's like, oh yeah, I was home again. It was great. I was like, okay, good. But yeah, I think that's why. It's because Maine is where the main event happens, and Joe feels drawn to that area, so he has to go back. And Norma obviously would have never left that area. They wouldn't have taken her and driven her back to Nova Scotia. So I think just circumstance leads it to be mostly in Maine, but with a little bit of a dash of the Annapolis Valley in there as well. Where did you live in Nova Scotia?
Kings in Halifax.
In Halifax?
Yeah, I went to Kings.
Oh, did you? Okay. I went to Dalhousie for a couple of my master's degrees. Yeah. Nice.
Did you just say a couple of my master's degrees?
I did get a couple of master's degrees while I was
Hang on. How many do you have?
I have 4.
I don't want to say you have like classic overachiever syndrome or anything, but what are your 4 masters in, Amanda?
They are in political science, information management, public administration, and fine arts and creative writing.
My goodness.
Yeah, I often say it's because I get bored easy and I just like to change it up every once in a while.
Are you done going to school now? Because you can change things up with your books.
I am not committing to anything.
Angie, do you have another question? Okay, hang on. Let me pin you so that everyone can see you. Yeah, are you teaching at Acadia or are you at school at Acadia?
No,
I
am. I'm teaching. I'm an associate professor in the Department of English and Theater as of July. So yeah, I'm having fun. My whole life is reading and writing and talking about reading and writing. So I'm living the dream.
That's awesome. Angie, go ahead.
Now I know about the fine arts part. I was going to ask if maybe Sam could arrange for you to come do a reading in the grasslands and maybe we could paint a house.
That would be dreamy.
Wouldn't that be
That'd
like
be
maybe
fun.
I need to go drive through the grasslands and find some abandoned farmhouse that we could
Do
paint?
not start painting people's random property, Angie.
I'll ask for permission, but wouldn't that be amazing? And
I
you
think
could
that'd
do
be
a
fantastic,
reading
Sam.
under the sky.
You know what? You should have been Amanda's publicist because that would have been a great book launch.
Yeah, I have my book launch. I live in the Annapolis Valley. So if you don't know the Annapolis Valley, we're known for farms, apples, and vineyards. We have like so many vineyards here. So I had my launch at Benjamin Bridge Vineyard and it was lovely. They had dinner and or like appetizers and drinks, and there were 70 people there. 75% of those were my aunts, uncles, cousins, brothers, and sisters. But yeah, it was great.
That is your hype team. That's required.
Yeah.
That was your question, Angie. Can we paint a house?
Yeah, if you do make it out here, Amanda, let me know. You and I can go maybe paint some fence posts if we can't find a house.
I'm game. I'm game for that.
It's the kindest kind of vandalism I've ever heard suggested.
We will
Just
make your
with
property
flowers and animals and things, just like in the book.
Yep.
Yes.
And the waves of the Bay of Fundy.
Yes.
Okay. I won't keep you much longer because I know this is way past your bedtime, and I'm someone who really does respect bedtimes. I know you don't want to talk about the book that you're working on, but just tell us what's next for you.
Yeah, so I'm on tour a lot right now. I'm at festivals. So I'm at the Toronto International Festival of Authors next weekend. I get Thanksgiving off. Woohoo! And then I'm in Calgary at the Calgary Word Fest. Going down to New York because of the Barnes and Noble award thing. So I'm going down there for that. But teaching. But my short story collection, Waiting for the Long Night Moon, it's named after the short story that I won the Indigenous Voices Award for in 2021. That's coming out sometime in the spring. Not really sure when, maybe May, maybe June. So that's on the go. And then I'm still plugging away at this new manuscript. I say I wrote it really quickly, but a first draft is literally just thoughts on pages. So now I need to take those thoughts on pages and make them a story. So I'm hoping the lovely thing about working at a university is that this summer I will get to just focus on my manuscript and getting it to where I want to be. But right now I'm kind of focused on my students because I really want them to have an appreciation of reading and writing. So.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for giving some of us your time and for the fantastic story. I'm just going to follow you on social media so I find out what you get in your Barnes and Noble swag bag.
Is there a swag bag? I didn't know
there
that.
There has to be a swag bag. There can't be a Barnes and Noble event without a swag bag. If they don't, I'm disappointed on your behalf.
Okay, fantastic. I'm going to look for that too.
They're going to see this video on YouTube and be like, we don't have swag bags, Sam.
If there is, I'll post it for you.
Or maybe they'll think that's a great idea and then you'll get a swag bag because I thought of it.
Maybe. I'm just really excited that they think my book is worthy.
Your book is so good. Everyone should think your book is so good. When I read it, it was among a list of books that were pitched to me in the spring, like for the spring. And it like on premise sounded good. But when I read it, I was like, this is the book we're doing in September. Like, I just knew that I wanted it to be that book. And that was months ago. It made me a little nervous that I read it months ago, coming in tonight, because usually I read them right beforehand so that I'm a little more on it with the names and stuff. But yeah, it was that good. So you deserve all the accolades and all the attention. And I hope nothing good things for you, because I love it when strong female women, you know what I mean?
I gotcha. Don't worry.
When women do good things and get good attention. And that was not a better sentence either. It's been a long day.
Agreed. It's almost 11 o'clock here, so I agree.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate this so much. And we're going to stay in touch because I want to see what you do.
Yay. Thank you. Thank
Thanks
you for
so
having
much.
me. I appreciate it. Thank you for all the kind words.
You're welcome. Good night, Amanda.
Night.